Greetings everyone and welcome to the webinar. My name is Akansha and I will be the moderator today. This webinar is in collaboration with John Henson from Procurement Insights and Jack Shaw from American Blockchain Council. They'll be speaking on the topic Impact of Blockchain and Distributed Ledgers on Procurement Process. Before we start, a few housekeeping tips for you all. At any point of time, you may send us your questions in the Q&A box and they will be addressed towards the end of the webinar. Introducing Zycus. As we may all know, Zycus is a leading global provider of complete source-to-pay suite of procurement performance solutions. Our comprehensive product portfolio includes applications for both the strategic and the operational aspects of procurement. Zycus has again been recognized as a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for Strategic Sourcing Application Suite in 2017. It is my pleasure to welcome our guest speakers, John and Jack. Introducing John, who is an editor and lead writer for the Procurement Insights blog with more than 25,000 followers. He has written more than 3,000 articles and papers, as well as 5 books on diverse subjects. In addition to being a much sought-after speaker and moderator internationally, John is also the host of highly proclaimed PI Window on the World show on Blog Talk Radio, which has aired more than 800 episodes since its initial broadcast in March 2009. Our second guest for the webinar is Jack Shaw, who is an Executive Director of American Blockchain Council. He is a visionary technology and business strategist who has spent his career leading companies in numerous industries and their technology suppliers to better and more efficient ways of conducting and operating their businesses. For over 20 years, Jack has provided advisory services to leading technology solution providers, as well as providing expert guidance and best practices to Fortune 500 companies such as GE, Coca-Cola, Bell, and many more. He is widely recognized for his expertise in leading-edge business technologies. Without taking any more time, I would now pass it over to John to start the webinar.
Thank you, Akansha. And of course, Jack, it's great to have you back again. I mean, we did a radio interview a couple of weeks ago on this, so I'm looking forward to a very, very interesting discussion. How about you?
Thank you so much, John. Yes, I am too.
Well, now I want to remind everybody that there is a tweet chat that will follow this webinar, and of course it will go on throughout the entire day. So if you want to check it out, if you want to participate, if you want to add any of your thoughts relative to what you heard today, certainly memorize this hashtag, which is blockchain chat, just as it is on your screen there. So I encourage you to join. There's industry professionals, industry experts who usually join in and offer their insights and perspective as well. So it adds a little bit of an added dimension to what you're hearing today. Now, I want to remind you one more thing before we go on, is this is going to be very much an interactive experience. And what I mean is you're not going to be sitting on your hands just listening. We want you to become a part of this. And so we have a number of interesting polls which we'll be posting and would love to have your input on and votes. Also, the Q&A. Even though there's one scheduled after or following the webinar, the Q&A, of course, is going to be ongoing. That means that I've got my screen open. So if you have any questions at any time throughout this entire webinar, don't wait for the end. Ask it then. If you have comments, any thoughts whatsoever, disagreements, by the way, because we're not looking for consensus here. Again, feel free to tap into your chat area, and we'll engage you right then and there. Now, today's agenda is very straightforward. Number one, we're going to focus on what is blockchain. And, Jack, I think this is an important question to start out because, as you pointed out when we were in the, I guess you could call the prep area, Fortune magazine, blockchain was featured on the cover, wasn't it? So what did they call it?
The cover of the September 1st issue is Blockchain Mania, how this revolutionary technology is transforming business and why everyone from Wall Street to Walmart is betting on it. So it's clearly moved into the mainstream at this point.
Perfect. Well, we're going to answer those questions and why is there a mania with it. Now, we also want to drill down further and more specific to our industry. How will blockchain affect the procurement world overall, in general? What impact will it have on our industry? And, of course, third and finally, how will blockchain affect me as a procurement professional? So that's on the agenda, and that's our target today in terms of covering these three areas. Now, what I want to talk about when we get to the first realm is, and I like this Dilbert cartoon, simply because it says blockchain, 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 and again, you have this ubiquitous presence of blockchain, but what's interesting is a lot of people may not necessarily understand what it is. So the whole focus of, and let's start off with getting a basis for understanding what our knowledge is, the first poll is going to ask the question, are you familiar with blockchain's role in the business world? Simple answer, yes, no, not sure, and what's blockchain and why should I care? So I'll leave that to Akanksha to set up the poll so you can start responding to it. Jack, this seems like a logical first question, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so, because awareness and understanding are the first key issues to effectively adopting new technologies, and both are growing rapidly, so I'll be interested in seeing the output among our attendees this morning.
Now, as Executive Director of Blockchain Council of America, one of the things that I find interesting is that we're focusing on the procurement world itself, but generally speaking, is there a greater understanding of blockchain? Because let's face it, blockchain is a distributed ledger, and I think in our last conversation we had, I mean, it isn't the only distributed ledger out there, yet it seems to be like the ubiquitous Kleenex term. You know, when you reach for a tissue, when you're sneezing, you say, pass me a Kleenex, even though not all tissues are made by Kleenex. I mean, is that really what blockchain is? Is there a good understanding of it, not just in the procurement world, but generally speaking, or do we have a long ways to go still?
I think that for the purpose of most business people, and certainly for procurement professionals, the distinction between what technically constitutes a blockchain implementation and the technical definition of distributed ledger is a technical fine point that's really more detailed than we need to worry about. What blockchain adds to the notion of distributed ledger is a degree of cryptographic support and synchronization, and it's certainly outside our scope to get into the technical details of how that works. But that makes you be able to have, in addition to sharing data in multiple different locations, have an immutable, permanent signed record of that data. So the big challenge many of us are dealing with today is how do we know that our information is safe? You know, we just saw the huge Equifax hack take place, well, it was announced just a couple of weeks ago. And can any computer be safe? And the question is, well, maybe not entirely, but with blockchain technology, you now have the ability to have the same information distributed across multiple computers and done so in such a way that you can be absolutely reliant on the fact that that information is secure, has not been hacked, has not been changed. And I think it's that combination. You can't really have a blockchain, at least other than in a narrow technical perspective, that's not distributed. There are ways to do distributed ledger that don't take advantage of the blockchain, but again, that's a fine technical point.
Okay.
And so, because your comment about Kleenex is very appropriate. I don't think anybody's going to get on someone's case because they use blockchain if they're looking at it from a business perspective.
Okay, so I got to ask this, and Akanksha, as you're listening, do you happen to have the poll results? Because usually they flash on the screen for us, because we'd really love to see those instantaneous answers. If you have them, if you could share them with us. And while I'm waiting for Akanksha to do that, let's move ahead to the next slide. One of the things, and this sort of goes with what you're talking about, and you know, the Fortune magazine and blockchain medium, Jack. So this is what we know, at least so far, from the procurement professionals with whom I've talked. Thank you. There's the results. Just before I get into the Gartner comment, it seems to be well distributed here. 14% say yes. 12% say no, 18% not sure, and blockchain, what's blockchain, 16% aren't sure. I mean, this is certainly improvement from when we took this poll last November, where we had 5% said, okay, I'm familiar with blockchain, and said, yes, I am. But, Jack, first of all, do these numbers surprise you?
No, they don't surprise me. In fact, I'm pleasantly surprised to see that 14% are yes, but that's not far off of line from what I would have expected. Awareness is getting to be much, much higher. And I'm delighted that the people who say, what's blockchain and why should I care, are at least listening to this webinar, because I'm afraid that a lot of the ones who have that attitude would say, why would I even want to listen to a webinar on something I don't know what it is and why I should care? So hopefully by the end of this hour, you will all be much more excited about the potential.
Well, you know, and it's kind of interesting. It sort of leads into the question that I have, and this is a statement. This is what we're being told. Gartner executive Peter Sondergaard says blockchain technology is overhyped right now. And he went into an explanation as to where he thinks it's something we have to watch, certainly in line with maybe what Fortune said is a mania, but something we have to watch. But really, it's not going to have, or it's not fully clear as the impact is going to have on business. There was talk again through Gartner at the last horizon that said federated trust model is the key to blockchain according to Gartner. And some of you may be saying, what is a federated trust model? Well, here's the image of a federated trust model. Jack, what do you think about what Gartner said? First of all, that it's overhyped, but we have to pay attention to it. And then the essential nature of having a federated trust to give blockchain that relevancy and elevate it to the point of actually being a usable platform, for lack of a better word, in the business world in general. What are your thoughts about those two statements?
Well, let me take it from the back. First, federated trust or federation trust, as it says on there, I think is simply another term. Gartner does an excellent job of coining phrases to describe emerging technologies, and sometimes they catch on and sometimes they don't. But my inference from looking at the diagram is we're basically looking at the concept that we talked about before of using blockchain technology and having information be distributed or federated around the internet, so you can rely on it being there, even if a single location or a handful of locations are hacked. I would say that it's a bit of, I think it's an overstatement to say it's overhyped. One could have gone back 20 years and taken a look at the emergence of the internet at that time and recognized that some of the things that people were anticipating being able to do on the internet were not yet ready for prime time at that point. And one then therefore could have said, this internet thing is overhyped. Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense of, if you want to run out in the next 90 days and do certain types of things, not all the pieces are in place to do that. The same thing is going on with blockchain today. But in terms of, is this going to be dramatically changing our world and the way we do business? Clearly, in retrospect, the answer for the internet was yes. And in parallel with that, should people then at that point have been planning for it and anticipating it? Again, clearly in retrospect, the answer was yes. I think that's exactly where we are with blockchain.
So you need, in essence, you sort of interrupt, but you need in essence this hype and awareness creates the, I guess, the Fortune magazine cover, and what even Gartner is saying is it's overhyped. It creates an awareness so that people start paying attention to it, because again, if you look at the distributed answers in the poll, it seems that everybody is at the whole, you know, the one side to the other, the whole pendulum of understanding blockchain. So I guess the hype, or even when he says it's the hype and the mania and all of these things, create the awareness that leads into the same path of we got to learn more about that. And the more you learn about blockchain is what you're saying, very similar to the more you learned about the internet and started using that, the more you learn about blockchain, the more you'll start to understand it. And that's where this sort of segues into the federated trust and what Gartner is talking about. Is that fair?
I think your point is very good, yes. That the learning is the key thing at this point for most organizations, and then segueing from there into a strategic planning process. Thinking seriously about how is this going to impact us over the next few years. And we'll have the chance, of course, to talk a little bit more about that later in the webinar.
Okay. So now if we look at, William just posted a question. You guys obviously know what blockchain is, talking about federation servers. I have no idea what you're talking about. Can we go back to basics, please? So I think, and this is, William, thank you. And this is an example throughout this whole webinar to everyone listening in. Ask a question as soon as it comes there. So Jack, what are we talking about? You know, we know about blockchain, federation servers, you know, what exactly, how does that fit into the equation from a basic understanding?
Well, let's step back. I haven't seen the utilization of the term federated trust or federation servers by anybody other than Gartner Group. Let me just, the simplest way of explaining blockchain that I've been able to identify is that blockchain does four things. One, it provides, and first of all, let me back up. Identical copies of the blockchain data are stored on all of the locations or nodes of any given blockchain. And depending on the implementation, there may be anywhere from dozens to hundreds to thousands of nodes or copies of that blockchain data. Every time information is added to the blockchain, it is replicated, synchronized across all of those nodes within minutes, possibly even as quickly as seconds. So there are identical copies everywhere, every time it's updated. Advanced cryptography and synchronization technologies are used to ensure that all of those nodes stay in sync. The result is that we have immutable, permanent, signed and time-stamped records of identity, of ownership, of transactions, or of contractual commitments. And those records can be viewed easily by any of the participants in whichever blockchain, whatever business or social ecosystem is operating a particular blockchain implementation. And they are essentially, for all practical purposes, unhackable and unaccessible to anybody who is not authorized to participate in that process. So those are the key things that blockchain delivers, and by delivering those things, it allows us to eliminate the need for any one of those entities that's participating in the blockchain to have to depend on any other one or to pay a third-party service to be the so-called master record keeper. All of us who are sharing information together, who have agreed to share information together, can access that information readily online without having to depend on any one of the others. It's a little hard to wrap your head around at first because it adds unique capabilities that we haven't had on the internet before, but it's extremely powerful in terms of the implications.
Okay, so here's Dan, and then I want to get to a question with Vincent, who just posted, why are blockchain nodes unhackable? But if it's safe to say, and maybe try to create a procurement parallel there, if you have a contract that's centrally located and accessible by different parties, if any one of those parties goes to alter or change a condition or term within that contract, then if that's changed, then everybody who has access to that contract centrally will be notified of the change. So in other words, what it does is maintains a consistent record while still giving the participants, the stakeholders, accessibility to introduce modifications or changes to it, but again, keeping everybody on the same page. And a federated trust, oversimplification, and Vincent will get to you in 1 second, is that you're creating a trusted pool or group of people who will have access to that document to make changes to it. I mean, that's the takeaway that I get. And I'm using the contract analogy because we're in procurement. But I mean, am I far off on there, or does that make sense?
No, everything you're saying is correct. And from a procurement and supply chain management perspective, I would also point out that the same thing not only applies to sharing of contracts, which is a relatively sophisticated use of it, but also sharing the information such as the source or provenance of parts or materials, information about the logistics and the status or location of shipments that are in transit. If it's something, for example, like food that might spoil if the temperature rises, what the sensor readings are at any point in time, all of the information then that is available to anyone at any point in the entire supply ecosystem can be made available to everyone who has an interest and is authorized to see that information in the entire ecosystem. And it's not a matter of having to pass the data around, it's a matter of the data is put out there where everyone authorized can readily see it. And the subset of those people who are so authorized can update, whether it's a contract, shipping data, origination data, or what have you.
Okay, now this leads into Vincent's question, then I have one from Dennis to follow. Obviously, based upon what we've described, security is the key. And Vincent asked, why are blockchain nodes unhackable?
Okay, so let's make a distinction between what's called theoretical or mathematical hackability and economic hackability. In order to be able, these blockchain nodes synchronize with each other approximately every 10 minutes at the most, and in many cases much less than that, sometimes found as quickly as a fraction of a second. And if somebody hacked into a single node, first of all, that's always going to be a tricky thing to do, but a really good hacker could do that. But if they hacked into a single node and they made a change in something, all of the records are in what are called blocks, and these blocks are connected to one another cryptographically, so that if you make a change to one block, then it's no longer, that's going to break the link to the next block. So you have to update information in the next block. That would break the link to the subsequent block. So you have to rewrite every one of the thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of blocks in that copy of the blockchain. That's a difficult and time-consuming thing to do. But if you were able to do that, you would have changed in whatever illicit way you desired that copy of the blockchain. But because the copies of the blockchain all synchronize with each other, all the rest of the copies of the blockchain would look over and say, hey, wait a minute, this one is different from us. We don't have consensus with that particular one. We are all going to ignore this one that's different, and the identical correct information would still remain on all of the other copies. So what that means is that if you really want to change data on the blockchain, you would have to hack into a majority of all of the copies of hundreds or thousands of nodes on that blockchain, rewrite them all. And keep in mind, they're all going to be on different computers with different kinds of data security capabilities and so forth. You'd have to hack into them all, rewrite them all, do it all simultaneously, and get it all done before the blockchain synchronizes it in less than 10 minutes. Now, it may be somewhat apocryphal, but one physicist has estimated that the amount of computing power, the amount of energy that would be needed to drive the amount of computing power that would be required to simultaneously hack, for example, the biggest and oldest blockchain, which is the Bitcoin digital currency blockchain. A majority of the nodes on that blockchain, rewrite them and get that all done in less than 10 minutes, is roughly equal to the amount of energy emitted during that same period of time by the sun.
So in other words, and the basis for Vincent's question, obviously, is we know what happened with Equifax. We've heard hacking nightmares and vulnerabilities, obviously. But what you're saying, there's a layered connectivity that makes it virtually impossible to hack in, although that doesn't mean people aren't going to try. But based upon what's out there today in terms of technology, blockchain provides what you could consider to be the most advanced security capability. I mean, that's the best way to conclude, right?
I think that's very well put. You know, with the challenge with Equifax and other famous hacks we've heard is those are data that was stored in a single central database. And once somebody figured out how to hack into it, then they got it. With blockchain, you would have to hack into multiple, as I said, dozens, hundreds, or thousands of locations, all simultaneously, and all within a very limited period of time. And it's essentially impossible.
Okay, so Vincent, hopefully that answers your question. And by the way, Jack's contact information as well as mine are available relative to the conclusion of the webinar, so you can always take the conversation further offline with us. Now, before we go to the next set of slides, Dennis is saying, what does this mean for pricing transparency or competitive insights? Maybe I guess what Dennis is saying, and please feel free, Dennis, to add or elaborate further on your question. What he's saying is if that information is accessible by everyone, even within the context of what Gartner calls a federated trust, what happens to confidential information? Like, does that have to be made available as part of this? Do you know what Dennis is asking? And Dennis, I hope you have, and he says yes, that's what he's asking.
Dennis, feel free to add more if you want, but your insight and your question is a very important one. So one of the things that can be done with the data that's stored on the blockchain is that data itself can be encrypted. So the synchronization and cryptographic processes that ensure that the data is identical does not depend on the data having to be in the clear where everybody can read it. Certain kinds of things, it might be desirable to have that done. Certainly things like the pricing with individual vendors, where you don't want other vendors in the same ecosystem to see what pricing you're getting from them, could be encrypted, and the appropriate trading partners could provide each other with private encryption keys that allow those who should be able to see that encrypted information to be able to easily read it. Well, it's still just basically, garbled bits of data to anybody else who's not authorized to see it. So
all right, one more question, and this is from Richard before we get to the next point. How easy is it to create a trust federation and likely cost to build and maintain? Now, I preface this, Jack, by what you're saying is Gartner so far has been the only organization, analyst firm, industry watcher to use the reference to federated trust, but we understand what that means. So I guess the question is number one, I'll preface Richard's question by, do you need a federated trust? Number two, if you do, what's involved with setting one up?
Well, the term that is used most widely around the world in blockchain circles is essentially to develop industry or business ecosystem consortiums or consortia. And I think that's what Gartner's getting at here with their term trust federations. In other words, it's identifying a group of organizations or entities with a common interest. Those may cross industry boundaries. They may include, for example, on the procurement side of the business, not only vendors, but include entities such as transportation carriers, third-party logistics companies, customs brokers, regulators of various types, auditors for the various different participants, and so forth. Now, entities like auditors and regulators, for example, would not be authorized to update information, but they would certainly be authorized to see certain pieces of information consistent with their authority and objectives in the roles that they play. Trust federation is another way of saying the same thing, but you put together the bottom line, as I say it, is blockchain is a team sport. The benefits come when let's all agree on how to do this, how to leverage this technology to take cost out of the ecosystem and delays and errors, and then we can compete on a higher, more profitable level for all of us.
Okay, well, you know what, and Michael, you asked the question. We're going to get back to it because we do have to. I could talk about this all day, and so if everyone's fine to stay here for a couple hours, I'm good for that. But Michael's talking about, does it make sense to have sensitive information in blockchain in such distributed systems, even if encrypted? And I think the point is that the encryption and the layered security that you described, Jack, actually does make it far more secure than a single location. So, Michael, definitely contact Jack or myself afterwards, and we can elaborate on your point. So what does Jack say? I think we already heard what Jack says, so let's go to the next one. How will it affect the procurement world? That, again, I like these Dilbert cartoons because, again, if you don't understand blockchain, and hopefully with this introduction we spent a little bit more time, we've answered a lot of your questions with regards to having the framework for understanding its basic premise. Now how do we drill down deeper into the procurement world? So I want to start, as before, with a poll. In what areas of the procurement process is blockchain likely to have the greatest impact? And of course, I'll cue the Jeopardy music and thank you to put the poll up for everyone to see. But you know, it'd be interesting after you've heard us talk for the first 20, 30 minutes as to how you would answer this. Is it going to impact smart contracts more? Payment and project and contract information, track and trace due diligence, accounts payable, or other areas? So the poll is up right now, and it'll be interesting to see the results. Jack, what's your, I'll turn it to you very quickly. I don't want you to influence answers, obviously, but what area do you think blockchain will have the greatest impact on in terms of what's posted?
I think initially, I think it's going to be the track and trace process. And then closely related to that, but not quite the same thing, is the issue of provenance. And there we're talking about who exactly had ownership and control over certain things from the very, very beginning. You don't want to suddenly find your corporate headquarters as being picketed by people that say that your company is supporting slave labor and warlords in third world countries because you discovered that a fifth-tier supplier has decided to pad their profits by, in fact, buying products or materials or whatever from those kinds of people, and as a result, and covering up their tracks by changing those records. With blockchain, you can track it all the way back to the process of, you know, even mineral extraction, and know exactly who had ownership and control all the way through the whole thing. So I think that's a little bit different from exactly where in the physical logistics delivery process is a particular part or material that we are expecting at some point in time, which is what the track and trace is about. I don't know if I've impacted people's observations on that, but I do see that there seems to be some agreement that the track and trace, as well as certainly the payment and project contract information capture and management, seem to be the leading candidates so far.
Well, you know what's funny from my perspective is that when I looked at this smart contract, and we sort of alluded to the central repository access through, and we'll use the term federated trust, but a group of people with access, I thought smart contracts would have been a little bit higher. And, you know, these answers tend to show that there is a greater understanding of blockchain's capabilities. At least that's the takeaway that I have. I mean, would I be incorrect in that?
No, I think you are right. I think that the impact on accounts payable is going to be very, very powerful because, quite frankly, we've been talking in procurement for over 30 years now about the concept of evaluated receipt settlement. Why do we need invoices? Why can't we simply make payments based on purchase order price and quantity of a product or service delivered? And that's never been really as widely adopted as a lot of people thought, and one of the main reasons why is lack of ability to have absolute reconciled agreement on that. With blockchain, you don't have to reconcile. You have a single set of shared records accessible to everyone, updated in real time, and in that scenario, you really don't need traditional invoices, traditional accounts payable and receivable processes. I say traditional. You still have to be able to watch those things, make sure payments are made when they're supposed to, but we can all agree on what the price was, what the amount delivered was, whether the service was effectively completed, all that kind of thing, and therefore anybody can do the math and come up with the same answer that a certain amount of money is due at a particular point in time. With smart contracts, it takes us to the next step, because smart contracts can actually be self-enforcing, in which case, for example, funds would be put in escrow at the time of the order was placed, and once it was agreed by the procurement organization, by the receiving company, that those products or services were delivered as specified with appropriate quality and so forth, that the smart contract itself could automatically transfer funds in payment without any further effort having to be made on the part of an accounts payable person.
Well, you know, this is interesting. I've got a whole flurry of questions coming up relative relative to this, Jack, and I think it's going to be good. I just want to start off by let's go to the questions first. I'll start off with Roland, and he's saying, isn't track and trace the most difficult area? The amount for different vendors, batches, mixes in an EDE supply chain is immense, and everyone needs to play ball for it to work. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think Roland, that your comment about everyone has to play ball for it to work. You don't have to have all of the vendors in an ecosystem and all of the transportation carriers and all of the third-party logistics players in an ecosystem to make it work at all. Now, the more you have, the better it's going to work. But if you have certain key vendors and who tend to utilize certain transportation methods or carriers of various types, and or certain third-party logistics companies, for example, then you can get those up and running and take advantage of the ability to share information jointly with those participants in the ecosystem, even while you're still continuing to evolve your processes and systems from the current structure to the long-term objective you have of getting all of your supply network up and running. And it's just like any other technology. You know, you probably have, if you're with a sizable procurement organization now, if you've been doing technology for many years, you may have EDI implementations that went up years ago and that are still up and running and maybe even still being expanded in some cases. You may have other people who are exchanging information on the internet, and that doesn't mean you don't still occasionally deal with a one-time supplier or a very small or unsophisticated supplier where you're still having to use more manual methods. You know, blockchain isn't going to solve all of that, but it will for where you can invest and work with those key participants in the ecosystem to get up and running on blockchain, take an awful lot of the cost and effort out of the processes and the friction, as people refer to it, out of those processes.
Okay, now I have to ask this, and Jazz Deep asked the question, what type of system or capability would a supplier need in order to integrate a blockchain with them? For example, if I want to track a good during shipment, how will we know from the blockchain once the supplier ships out the good? And then I'm going to take it to the next question from Bob, who's saying, when it comes to the transparency that blockchain allows, do you think that this will help solve corruption? So these two questions, I guess, go to the nuts and bolts in the first part, Jack. Can you track shipments of goods and confirm, for example, that the supplier shipped the good? And does this kind of transparency extend to the point where it will be able to solve problems with corruption? If you could just, in a minute or so, what are your thoughts?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think it's going to, you know, nothing will ever make all corruption go away. But what it will do is it will make it much, much more difficult for people to be corrupt and then cover their tracks by changing the records of what happened. So yes, I think it will allow us to make great progress against corruption. Now, as far as tracking it, one of the very exciting things about blockchain is the successful proofs of concept that have already been done and efforts underway for implementation of the integration of blockchain with Internet of Things technology. Now, in many respects, Internet of Things technology are various forms of and more advanced versions of such things that we've had around for some years, as barcode scans and RFID devices, and increasingly chips that can communicate electronically directly into the internet, so that as those things are scanned or read or that information is communicated, we can detect that this pallet of product has moved from point A to point B, or this particular object that's got a chip embedded in it is at this particular location and is at, you know, like you said, a particular temperature, hasn't been seeing appropriate levels of vibration or anything else that you might be able to track with the sensor. And by using blockchain technology, you can verify that the data is in fact coming from the appropriate Internet of Things device, object, what have you, and that it hasn't been either intentionally or accidentally altered in process, so that you know we have timely, accurate data from the time it's originally captured.
Right, so let's go here because let me just go to what the impact on the procurement world is and step out a little bit from this discussion. Andrew Bartolini from CPO Rising said that blockchain is still in its infancy, but it could have enormous implications for global business and commerce, and in particular, wide-ranging uses for supply management. So let's look at these very quickly, Jack. For example, as we forward this, a smart contract. I think we're already talking about that. He was saying that legal and procurement teams between two trading partners, a digital automated records of what goods were bought, sold, delivered, and real-time end users' feedback or input across all lines of business. I think we touched on that earlier on.
Yes, I agree.
Mapping requirements for human resources and procurement teams would allow an organization to perfectly map business requirements to external workers and create untouchable systems of record, payment, project, and contact information. I think we've covered that as well, don't you?
Yes, that falls into the discussion about consortia or trust federations, as they were also referred to, working together to agree how to map that data in a way that is commonly shared.
Perfect. Next one, track and trace risk management. Again, you know, we've touched on these things as well, and it seems to sort of align. And if I could just interject at this point, Jack, there seems to be this melding from the Gartner extreme, and I don't know if it's safe to say Gartner extreme, but it's overhyped, and the mania on Fortune magazine to, it seems to be a progressive evolution of understanding here that the industry is finally catching up with what blockchain's capability actually is, such as with track and trace risk management. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Well, yeah, I think you're right, and again, it's a matter of looking at the timing issues. It may be overhyped if people look at what's going on with blockchain and say, oh my gosh, we've got to get everything we're doing into a production mode blockchain in the next 6 months. That's not going to happen. But on the other hand, when people ask me how, with some of the current constraints and limitations of blockchain, how soon should we worry about starting to plan for it? My answer is yesterday. And the reason is those constraints and limitations are going to be eliminated by the brilliant technical people that are working on these issues way faster than you can modify your organization's processes, infrastructure, and business model in order to take full advantage of it. So that's why I tell procurement executives, start thinking about your blockchain strategy now.
In other words, in the old analogy, don't wait for it to rain to buy an umbrella. I had to put that in.
Well put, yes.
Accounts payable, and this is, again, Andrew Bartolini from CPO Rising, is that blockchain could be an all-in-one purchase order, requisition, and invoice. And he's talking about linking upstream sourcing and procurement processes with downstream payment remittance. I mean, it's almost like, and create an audible report, he's almost talking about a framework for a P2P to a certain degree here, isn't he?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why the leading vendors of P2P systems are all working on how to incorporate blockchain functionality, how to integrate their applications into blockchain in order to let their clients take full advantage of this technology as quickly as possible, because with the rare exception of maybe a handful of Fortune 100 kind of multi-billion-dollar corporations, most people are not going to develop all of their own technology to do that. They're going to depend on their vendors to support their needs in that area.
You know, if I had another poll, Jack, I'd ask how many people thought blockchain synonymous with P2P. But we don't have that poll, but certainly it's giving something to think about there. So basically, overall, what does Jack say? And I guess to sum up this section, Jack, what we want to say is that what we're hearing out there in the world from the Gartners, from Fortune magazine covers, from industry analysts like an Andrew Bartolini, is that they have it coincides with how you, and again, the definitive source and an authoritative source of information, obviously, on blockchain, it sort of aligns with what you've been saying all along. So this is really the realization of something that you've known was coming, you know, long before we're at this webinar today, correct?
Well, yeah, I've had the good fortune to work with procurement supply chain related technologies for over 35 years now. So I've been able to watch them evolve, and there have always been significant constraints to how far you could take them in terms of enhancing those processes, both within the enterprise and among entities in a business ecosystem. And what blockchain does is just take it one step further than what we could ever go before, because of the ability to reliably and securely share information across entity boundaries, and it eliminates some other constraints. There will still be plenty to do. There will still be interesting challenges around sourcing, for example, and new suppliers in the market. Analytics and AI will help us address some of those. Blockchain will make those things work much more effectively. But I think it's very exciting for procurement professionals in terms of the impact on the process, and that in turn will have significant impact on how the professionals themselves do their jobs.
Perfect. Now, one thing, just before I go to the next point and conclude with a question or comment from Angelique. Jack, some of the people are saying that they can't hear you clearly, and if you could speak louder. I'm hearing you perfectly, but if you could speak a little louder, that would be great.
I will do the best I can, John. Thank you.
You have great info. Now, Angelique said, could we assume blockchain is about sharing with several parties having the same interest in data? Can we see it as kind of portal they all connect to, or how else is the agreement settled? I had this before I went to this section, but I think with what we've just covered in this series of slides to this point is that it certainly answers her question that it is really a portal to connect everybody to a centralized reservoir of insights and capabilities and information. Is that a good way to
let me clarify one point. It's a decentralized reservoir of insights and information, because you're right, the portal analogy I think is an excellent one, but it's a portal to a store of information that is shared across the internet by those who are authorized to access it, and yet is not operated or controlled by any one single entity.
That's perfect. Exactly what I was over, and hopefully, Angelique, that gives you the answer. Because in reality, it's not a single truth. What it is that it's a contributor. It's a place where people, again, from different points, decentralized points, can contribute to a shared knowledge or capability.
Well put,
yes?
John.
Does that make sense?
It certainly does to me. Yes, John.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next. Session. Great questions, by the way. How will it affect me? And I like this Dilbert cartoon simply because I did a terrible job, and I'm not asking for apology. Just follow your conscience because you gave the job to me. But ultimately, it comes down to, we've taken the high level of what is blockchain. We've gone down and said, what's the general impact of blockchain on our industry or profession as a whole? But how will it affect me as the procurement professional? And again, cueing our Jeopardy music and Kangsha, here's the next poll. What impact will blockchain have on procurement professionals? Will it have no impact? Will it have some impact? Or will it have significant impact? And take a few minutes a minute, I think, is what we've got to answer this particular poll. Jack, what do you think the answers are going to be? Here, let's put on your prognosticator cap. I was going to say Johnny Carson's Karnak, but not everybody may remember Johnny Carson. You and I have been around a long time. But,
yeah, right.
What do you think the answer is going to be out there? What do you think is the response you're going to?
What I'm most interested in is seeing how the breakdown is between A and C, because in my experience with this kind of answer choice, an awful lot of people simply default to B, and that may happen again. We'll see. But what I'm interested in seeing more is the breakdown between the number of people that think it will have a significant impact and the number of people that think it will have none.
Now, what's interesting, I consider this to be the most important link between them, because we've certainly tied the link to what blockchain does and how it affects the industry. But one of the things very early on, and in the early days of the ERP, e-procurement solutions, the talk of maverick span and supply or user resistance to use the technology, it was always an obstacle to adoption, even though there were promises of great savings on the other side of that compliance. It took an innovative technology such as the on-demand, the P2P platforms we see today to certainly remove some of those obstacles. Is it safe to say that the technology within blockchain is already robust and that, realistically speaking, the obstacles should not be as daunting? Do you know what I'm saying, Jack?
Yes, I know what you're saying. And I would say that the technology within blockchain is not yet as robust as we will eventually like to see it be. And by eventually, I mean over the next probably 6, 12 to 18 months, we're going to be seeing huge advances. It's already extraordinarily robust and being used for a significant number of procurement and supply chain applications around the world. And it's robust enough to support that. But it's going to be faster, more reliable, even more secure, because you still have to secure the interfaces to and from the blockchain, even if the blockchain itself is essentially unhackable. But at the same time, yes, the real opportunity here, I think, is for people to step back and rethink how their ecosystems are constructed and how blockchain can enable new and different ways of doing things from how we do it today. And again, the analogy is very, very strong to what we saw with the internet from 20 years ago up until the past few years, in terms of how many industries saw tremendous changes in their business models.
Okay, so now let's go here. First of all, I want to go, so the poll results, I think it was interesting, is that 3% say no impact, which is a good sign, because what that means is that the majority believe that blockchain is coming. We better get ready for it. The degree of impact is split to 50% some impact and 43% significant impact. So these are very interesting numbers. In relation to these polling results, so I guess one of the questions I want to be able to ask, because this goes to impact, is Jasdeep said, I'm still not clear on what capability a supplier would need in order to integrate these blockchain capabilities, like with an SAP or a JDE. I guess that will alter the response a little bit, Jack, if they understand that connectivity aspect in relation to the degree of impact. So what would you say with somebody who says, okay, we've got SAP, we've got JDE, how do we integrate that?
Well, that's an excellent point. And if the folks from Zycus don't mind my mentioning at least an indirect competitor in the form of SAP, SAP made a major announcement at their Sapphire user conference back in May, where I was a speaker, and that was that they are moving ahead with a strategy to blockchain enable their entire suite of products. Of course, they're not going to wave a magic wand and do it all overnight, but over the next couple, 3 years, they're planning on blockchain enabling everything they do and all of their platforms, so that people who have, and their partners who have developed products leveraging their underlying platform technology can also have those be readily blockchain enabled. So my answer to Jasdeep would be, make sure you engage in discussions with your representatives from SAP, JDE. The same applies to anybody else and any of the rest of your technology vendors. What is your time frame? What is your schedule for implementing blockchain? While at the same time, you engage in discussions with the other players in your business ecosystems, your key vendors and the other ones as we've identified before. And getting a good understanding of where those things stand will help you in developing your strategy to figure out what timing makes sense, where is it going to be quickest and easiest for us to leverage things that our technology vendors may be planning to provide us soon, and help us maybe gather the low-hanging fruit, and what are the things that are more strategic in nature that we need to be looking out perhaps 2 to 3 to as long as 5 years in terms of how we're going to evolve our procurement and supply chain processes.
So the net in all of this for Jasdeep's question is that, because she went on to ask, can it integrate with ERP systems and integrate SAP? The answer would be, based on what you said, is yes, there is the integration capability. It's almost like, is it safe to say it's like a seamless backbone into these platforms? Do you know what I mean, Jack? It's like well, maybe clarification on that. I mean, yes. The integration, when you talk about integration, because that has had many meanings over the year. I mean, right. I remember the old days where you had to build a bridge to hook up into Oracle or other systems, and in procurement of the past, solutions were called bolt-on. We're now in a cloud world, a real cloud world of modular interconnectivity. I mean, so in the terms of integration, is it really a platform or a backbone upon which these other systems, like an SAP, these other solutions can then utilize to communicate and integrate?
Yes, that's exactly correct, and that is exactly the direction they're going. But that's why it's important to have the discussions with your technology vendors. What is the timing? Which of your applications are ready for this now, or let's say in the next 90 to 180 days? Which of the applications that we'll have to wait until later into 2018 or even beyond before they're going to have them fully blockchain enabled. And again, that way you can develop your plan, because these companies are investing in some across them billions of dollars into blockchain enabling their applications. They're going to be able to move faster in terms of delivering capabilities than most people will be able to change their processes and business models to be able to take full advantage of them.
So in the end, and Sujay had put in there, it would help in faster turnaround time and add transparency to the transactional processes through all of this integration. I mean, is that the best way before we move on?
I agree, Sujay, completely.
Okay, well, one more thing here, and this is kind of interesting. You know, I love the questions we're getting today, Jack, because this is a learning process rather than, again, sitting and listening to us go on and talk. Although we enjoy our conversations, having this interaction really opens up the door to meaningful discussion. Is that one final question? How far are we, at Magnus asked this, how far are we from an environment where there is the stable digital currency that can be used large contracts?
I would say we are probably somewhere between 3 and 8 years. So out in the early between 2020 and 2025 as far as the digital currency for payment per se. But having said that, keep in mind there are already banks that are leveraging blockchain technology to do such things as make international payments, that even for such things as wire transfers typically take at least a day, and commonly 2 to 3 business days or more, and do them in 30 seconds or less. And so you don't necessarily have to be using Bitcoin or Ether or any of the other digital currencies in order to settle payments via blockchain technology. On top of that, we've got many nations, some of the leaders of which are Japan, Estonia, that have already said that it's their intention at least to provide their government fiat currencies in digital form. So I think we're going to see that increasingly start to happen. But that's really sort of a parallel process to how do we use blockchain technology to address the underlying procurement and supply chain functions themselves.
Well, you know what's interesting, and what I like about your response, Jack, is that far too often, again, when you're getting into this, you equate blockchain being synonymous with Bitcoin and Bitcoin being synonymous with blockchain, and that isn't the case. I just want to remind everybody, we're coming to the end of the webinar, but I've been graciously given an extra 5-10 minutes for us, Jack. So if you want to stay around, we're going to be here to stay around. Let's go on to the next slide here. We we can imagine a world in which contracts are embedded in digital code and stored in transparent shared databases. We've talked about that. We're protected from deletion, tampering, and revision. Well, we certainly have covered that area as well, Jack, in terms of the security or the levels of security, and where every agreement, every process, every task and payment would have a digital record, a signature, a footprint that could be identified, validated, stored, and shared. I mean, that goes to the essence of what we've been talking about this morning, isn't it, Jack?
Absolutely. And so in that world, how are your procurement supply chain processes going to work most effectively?
Now, they're saying intermediaries, and interesting with your talk about banks and what they're doing with it right now, but intermediaries, and this is in the Harvard Business Review, the truth about blockchain earlier this year, such as lawyers, brokers, and bankers. Hopefully there's no lawyers, brokers, or bankers out there. Might be necessary because the organizations, the individuals, would transact and interact with one another with little friction. So is that a viability? Do you, in essence, remove some layer of human interaction? Because I noticed you had made the reference to the Internet of Things. Is this really along the lines, or at least in part, of what you were talking about, Jack?
Yeah, we definitely want to eliminate unnecessary human intervention so that the humans involved in managing the processes and ecosystems can use their judgment, experience, and creativity to make them as much better as possible. The roles that intermediaries like lawyers and brokers and others play, it's not so much that those people or those entities will be eliminated, but purely intermediary functions that are simply about taking information from party A and handing it to party B, those functions will be eliminated. And what it means then is that the people who add value in other ways will still survive. They'll just have dramatic changes. So lawyers, accountants, auditors are going to be working in very different ways from in the past. If there are people in business functions that depend almost entirely on this kind of intermediary function, it may be that those do in fact go away. I'm not sure I'd be investing a lot of money into land title companies with so many governments now planning to move records of land titles onto the blockchain.
Okay, so at the end of all of this, it's safe to say no matter what context, and even for the procurement world and at the procurement professional level, blockchain will affect your business. I think the poll results showed that in terms of the belief of at least some impact, if not a major impact. So what does Jack say? I think we've had, let's sum it up, Jack, in 1 minute, and then one thing I want to say beforehand, we go to the sum up. Rodney asked, is there a certification becoming an expert on blockchain? I thought I'd insert this last one in here because he posed the question a little bit ago, but after everything we've said, after everything we've talked about, it's safe to say that blockchain is coming down the tracks and it's going to have a big impact. Is certification, is there a way to become an expert on blockchain?
Well, there's different kinds of blockchain experts. There's technical implementation experts, and then there's strategic business experts. At the American Blockchain Council, one of the key things we do is we provide education for senior executives and business managers to help them understand the strategic business implications. We have not gone so far as to try to state that the education we provide is some kind of a formal certification. I haven't seen anybody else doing anything quite similar to that myself in that area. There are many more companies offering technical training in blockchain coding and implementation. Some of them claim to offer certifications. Again, I haven't really seen any broad body emerge and say we're the body that's authorized to validate certifications and so forth. So it's still a little bit of early days in that process. But having said that, there's a variety of ways to get up to speed, and ultimately you need people with expertise in both areas to be successul.
All right, Jack, listen, you know what? We're running out of time. In 40 seconds, okay, 45, what would be the #1 advice you'd give to procurement professionals regarding blockchain?
Create broader awareness across your company, and across your ecosystem. educate yourself and your key colleagues, especially senior executive decision makers around your company, and start working on developing your strategy for blockchain-enabled procurement supply chain management.
Jack Shaw, you know, it's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to the next time we do one of these. I think we should take this on the road, this show. Don't you think?
That would be a pleasure, John. I always enjoy talking with you.
Well, and you know, and before I just turn it back to Kanksha for this, to take the reins for the remainder, I just want to thank you as participants. You know, even though we ran overtime, the majority of people are still here, which is a sign that, you know, there's a great deal of interest. Your questions were good questions. They were an important part of this discussion because it gives us an opportunity to align what we know about blockchain, and in particular Jack's expertise, with what you're thinking about the most. So I just want to thank all of you for being active and posing these questions. That was